Hi everyone, my name is John Hogan. I'm a neuroscience researcher at UCL. Over the last 2 years, our lab has become increasingly involved in supporting academic corporate collaborations. What I'm going to talk about today is some of the kind of practical learnings I've learned over the last kind of 2 years working with a kind of diverse set of clients. Some of the client requirements can be fairly straightforward. This is some work we did with an advertising agency called JWT. They were having a big strategy convention, and what they wanted to do is come up with some new creative that would generate a lot of buzz around this strategy convention. So what they asked us to do is they wanted some of their keynote speakers, Guy Murphy and Sir Lawrence Friedman, to get into a brain scanner, an fMRI scanner, and have them think about their topic that they're going to be speaking about. So this wasn't an experiment, but this was a way to kind of image their brain while they were thinking about their topic. And the idea was to use these images to generate seductive and engaging creative, and they did a really, really good job with it. They used these images in this kind of medical style, ran ads in the newspapers and various different media channels, and used the kind of neuroscience as marketing. And it ended up being very, very successful for them, and this took maybe a week's worth of work. It was quite a quick and easy tactical piece for us. They came in, we had 2 people in a scanner. There's no experimental contrast or anything. This is a fairly straightforward piece of work, but they were very, very happy, and this ended up being a reasonably cost-effective project for them. Other clients have more kind of experimental requirements. This is M. Ford. She's a very kind of famous social media influencer. She has many millions of followers. And she was very interested in the neural response differences between untouched and retouched images in our kind of perception of beauty. And she came into the lab, and we put her and a number of different participants into the scanner and showed them some of these different touched and untouched images. And this is still within the realm of pretty straightforward neuroscience for us. You can put them in a scanner, you can see the mirror there. We were projecting the images onto the screen, very kind of standard fMRI techniques that I was very, very familiar with. But for many of the clients, as I discovered, this is really not the real world, or it's not real enough anyways. They have lots of questions that involve people embedded in social situations, and putting them in an fMRI scanner is just not a realistic enough environment to kind of answer some of the questions that they're asking. This is a bit of an extreme example, but we got approached recently by Desperados, which is a beer brand. They put tequila in beer, which I have questions about. But they wanted us to help them investigate creativity in the deepest pool in the world while techno music is playing and the participants are in scuba gear underwater partying. So a quite different environment than our lab at UCL, but this gives you an idea of the kind of different requests we get from academia into these corporate projects. So while that was an extreme example, there are often kind of challenging research environments involved in working in some of these corporate collaborations, and kind of as a result of that, we've constantly needed to explore less typical biomarkers. So my background, I'm most familiar with fMRI, and all my academic research involved using fMRI, so very familiar with that. But since I've been getting involved with the kind of corporate integrations, I've had to kind of broaden my methodological approaches to use different biomarkers that are more kind of available and suitable for these corporate projects. And the last point is, in academia you tend to work with other academics, but in these corporate collaborations, you often embedded in large multidisciplinary teams, people with much different backgrounds, and that can be kind of challenging, but also really, really rewarding. So I'm going to take you through a case study right now, a very simple one, but I think it kind of teases out some of the points that make for a good corporate academic collaboration. This project called Best Live, that was the campaign idea that this West End theater company came up with. So they're very interested in trying to get people to go do theater performances more often. And they're convinced that, as theater fans, that there really is something different about being in an embedded audience, watching a live performance, versus sitting back on your couch and watching TV. And their kind of challenge is, how do we reach this kind of new audience of people who have an unprecedented access to digital content? You know, often on dual screens, you're sitting there watching something on your iPad, and you know, you've got an endless supply of great performance material on your TV. Why bother going to the theater anymore? Like, why would you get out? Why would you pay that extra money? And why would you go sit amongst a bunch of strangers and watch this performance when I can, you know, grab Netflix on my couch? So this is their kind of challenge, and they have only kind of previously only had really kind of traditional ways of addressing that challenge. Basically, just ask people after a show, you know, what did you think about the experience? And this has pretty much been the kind of foundation of theater marketing for since theater began, really. You know, 5 stars, it was absolutely brilliant. But this approach is not really cutting through to this new potential audience of theater goers. So their question to us was, is there anything special about being there live? Like, we can ask people and they can tell us a little bit about their experience with the performance, but is there anything else that science could add to kind of add some richness to that story? Which is a very good question. Happy to look into that for them. And as a first step, and I really, really recommend this as a first step for academic corporate integrations, is, and this is very, very kind of bread and butter stuff for academics, is, you know, really do a literature review and synthesize all these findings and share a kind of insight report with that company. And the more people in the company that get this report, the better. You know, you get that entire team reading all of this kind of background research. I mean, what do we know already about live theater? And in this instance, you know, there's quite a bit of research. And I found when we sat down with those different teams and everybody read the report and took it through them, we started to all have a kind of common language for describing some of the challenges and opportunities. And I think this is a really useful way of starting out any type of corporate academic engagement. As a business person, if you have questions about your users or your product, engaging with academic teams who can go and collate and synthesize all of the kind of state-of-the-art is a really, really valuable thing, and it doesn't need to take a lot of time. The next thing that you need to do is find an appropriate biomarker. So, you know, we're looking at a theater environment, so, you know, you're definitely not going to use something like fMRI. EEG was also out of the question. We found the theaters were very, very apprehensive of having strange-looking people with skull caps on in the audience. So we had to look elsewhere at things that are both available, can use them, cost-effective, and can measure something interesting about the experience. So this video showed some guy running around with the heart rate monitor. You might wonder, well, how's that applicable to a theater environment where you're going to be sat down for 2 hours? So I had all the clients kind of put on the wristband, and I said, okay, Sarah, you know, flap your arms a little bit, and, you know, she'd get a nice little heart rate spike. And then I'd say, okay, everyone stare at Greg, and then everyone switches and looks at Greg, and his heart rate goes through the roof. And what's happening is this kind of social response where just by having people look at him and him feeling quite on the spot or awkward, you're getting this massive spike in heart rate. So it's measuring this kind of autonomic response, which we thought would be very, very useful for measuring and describing what it's like to be in a live theater audience. So after much negotiation, we found a theater that was willing to have kind of 24 people show up with these giant-sized Fitbits and sit in the studio audience. The theaters were really, really worried that these things would somehow kind of interfere with your microphones, despite this being very similar technology that many of you are probably wearing on your wrists right now. Anyways, after some negotiation, we convinced them to let us wire 24 people and go to a live theater production of Dreamgirls at the Savoy. And what we found when we compared this to a similar sized group watching the Dreamgirls movie, which is practically identical, other than maybe not live, is that you get this kind of incredible range of heart rates in the live theater edition. But you will see similarities. In the movie, you get the kind of same bump there in the middle and the same bump towards the end, but the range is far greater in the theater condition. And then when we looked at the individual heart rates and we set them aside the British Heart Rate Foundation's recommended cardiovascular zone, so this is the level of heart rate that they recommend for cardiovascular fitness, that kind of division between the blue and the warm color above it, we noticed that people on average spent about 30 minutes. They didn't seat the whole time, 30 minutes in this kind of heart fitness cardiovascular zone. And when we told people this, these participants, I mean, they had no idea. They would have said the same thing. Oh, it was a very good show. They didn't realize that despite being sat down for 2 hours, you spent 30 minutes in what the British Heart Rate Foundation recommends as your kind of, this is what you should be striving for at the gym, which was quite remarkable to people. And not just the participants, the media kind of had a field day with this. So we got lots of posts in different media outlets. Some of them we had to rein back a little bit. They wanted to say things like, why don't you just cancel your gym membership and go to theater all the time, which is not what we're saying. You're not working out your muscles or anything there, but this is simply cardiovascular. But this got picked up in the UK media, also in the New York Times, so it was kind of an international response, despite this being a fairly straightforward experiment. Stage productions, all kinds of different media coverage. And my personal favorite, especially being a Canadian, even Margaret Atwood tweeted about this work, which I found personally very rewarding, growing up reading her books. So I'd like to just kind of summarize this. This was a particular case study, but I think I'm going to just kind of put this into a simple framework. And this is based on the last kind of 2 years' work of how you run these academic corporate collaborations. First and foremost, you need to come up with an interesting question, which is often, especially on the business end, a bit more difficult than it might seem at first. And we have to often work with clients back and forth to kind of hone something down that's both kind of business relevant, but also can be empirically tested in some way. The first example was what's special about being in a live audience. We recently got a question, which I think is a very, very good one. Which calls are most stressful for their agents? So this company is a large airline in South America, and they run this call support center where if there's any issues with flights or safety issues, all these calls go into this kind of centralized room, which I was in, and it feels like a NASA launch center. There's all these lights, and if there's problems, everything goes red. It's quite an intense environment. And they're very concerned about the well-being of their workers and how stressed they were. And they asked us, listen, we have call categorization, so we can classify each call that comes in. Could you start measuring the response of our support staff to see which calls are particularly stressful, which ones are really arousing them, so that potentially we could get into a way of kind of load balancing that stress where we're routing more stressful calls to people that are in a kind of less stressed state or haven't received many of those calls in a short time previous, which is a fantastic question, and would be another kind of suitable biomarker would be to use something like ectodermal activity or heart rate. So that's another example of a good question. After that, I think I really recommend this, is really getting the academic side of the collaboration to pool their resources and kind of pull the state of the art in and around that question, provide that context. Go out and do the literature review. This is things that we're very familiar doing, and you can loop in other postdocs or even more junior students and really help frame this kind of question in context for your business partners, help them really understand what is known. I think you might even have projects that just get to this point. If I was a business person, I would be thinking really hard about every quarter coming up with some questions we have about customers or our product, and just engaging with academic partners and saying, what do you guys know about this area? Because the communication is such that we might be sitting on a whole kind of wealth of data, the questions that you're interested in, and it's just a matter of kind of collaborating and asking for these things. So potentially you have a number of projects that just get to this point. But what we find is when we provide these insight reports, they tend to generate extra questions. And again, this is a really smart place to start. Next, what you really have to do is drill down and find out what can you measure, and that's going to be constrained by things that are what's available and cost effective. We do fMRI studies, but they are very expensive. It takes many months to analyze the data. Does this fit with your kind of time constraints, with your budget constraints? So this is the real kind of question, often one of compromise and fit, is what's capable of answering the question, and what also fits with the business realities of this particular project. My favorite part, of course, is gathering the evidence. But here, I really want to call out a distinction between the level of evidence needed. So in my first example, and then you saw that they really weren't after, that advertising agency wasn't after any type of evidence that was going to steer any type of marketing decisions. They just wanted very cool and engaging material. And that's a much lower evidential bar than something that's going to be used to kind of define your product strategy, in which case you'd want to have very strong evidence and larger, longer-term studies. So getting the business partner clear on, what evidence do you need? What are you looking for here? Are we just trying to do something that will have engage your audience and be interesting in perhaps a demonstration or some great imagery? Or are you really looking to understand something fundamental about your customers and your product? And those are two ends of a kind of evidence spectrum, and the complexity and cost scales accordingly as you go along that spectrum. And then the last point, and this is one we had to learn over and over again a couple times, was think about how you're going to share these results. I mean, lots of the things that might be known in academia might be not well understood outside academia, so often media outlets and others are very, very interested in these findings, and it makes a lot of sense to think up front about your communication plan. Also thinking about things like the right to publish your results, any of these type of collaborations, you should have these discussions up front. You should retain the ability to report on the results in academic journals, but also who's going to manage communication in the non-academic outlets, and who's going to kind of be able to constrain what is said so there's not misinterpretations or misrepresentations of the data. So this is a framework you really, really want to get set up in advance, and it takes a bit of negotiation. But doing it after the fact is a mistake. This is something you should do kind of early days in the engagement. The last point for me is that I really, really enjoyed the last couple of years. There's a lot of great questions and great data in the academic world, and I think in the corporate world, and I think on the academic side, we're sitting on a lot of really relevant findings, and I think it's just a matter of opening these communication channels, and actually the barrier doesn't really need to be that high. Even something like these insight reports, these things should be happening much, much more frequently. Having done a few of these over the years now, it's something that, if I'm in the business world, I'm going to recommend to anybody that I come in contact with, because I think this is a really, really smart way of work. I think there's a good synergy here, and I think it's really worth engaging both sides. If you're on the business side and academic side, really try to push this because I think it's mutually beneficial. All right, thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you, Jaron. I'd like to invite some questions from the audience.
Thank you for great talk and your processes. I completely agree with your process, and exactly the same process I adopted. My question is, when do you feel the barrier gap with the business in your process?
Yeah, I think it's just awareness. Like when I talk to people, corporate contacts, they're like, I never knew you guys would be interested in doing this type of work, or that you were so approachable. And then you talk to academics, and they're like, well, no one ever asked us if we wanted to do this stuff, so we haven't really gotten into it. So I think there's just a base level of communication. I don't think the barriers are very great there. I think it's just a matter of awareness that if you want to partner on the academic side, this doesn't need to be a multi-year, multi-million pound investment. Like you can have these kind of small tactical projects, or just reach out and say, what do you guys know about this question, about this area? And I found academics very open to answering those type of questions, and corporate partners very able to articulate what they want. There shouldn't be this type of resistance, because it's actually quite easy in my experience anyways. So I think it's just awareness, more or less. That's my view anyways. Oh, I'm directing questions.
Great talk. So kind of going on from that, I'm kind of curious that it seems that maybe there's been a bit of a kind of, maybe not as much communication as it could have been between both sides, and I'm kind of curious that for the future, what would you kind of recommend for both kind of academic and the kind of business world to be able to kind of come together and do things more, like any particular things from your insight that you think would help them to come together more? Yeah, and I tried to stress that a little bit. We've really found that kind of initial information sharing point to be very, very useful, that kind of insight report. And I think it's very important to get as wide a team on the corporate end together for that session, because if you get everybody reading that background information, and if you've done a good job kind of synthesizing the thinking in a way that's accessible to non-technical readers, then you start to really quickly all get on the same page and all start speaking the same language. So I think investing in that kind of upfront step really helps them focus on what's important, refine their question, but also gets everybody kind of speaking the same language. Of all those things, that kind of initial step, which is not a terribly expensive or time-costly undertaking, is very, very important. How about before they even kind of decide to get in touch? I mean, I'm wondering that, is it just a case of them kind of sending emails to each other? Because it seems a little bit kind of, maybe there's no kind of formal structural platform. I suppose even an event like this is a kind of platform, right? Just curious.
Yeah, you're right. There probably is room for improvement there. It is quite unstructured, and we'll often get some kind of pretty out there requests, like the deep pool example, and there'll be a lot of back and forth before we kind of even distill that down into something that's even potentially answerable. So you're right, that we haven't worked that out yet. There is often some kind of back and forth at the beginning, just to even get this into even a vague project plan.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I try to pick one up from the Slido question. So the second one, there are common pitfalls working with business. What are the most common things you need to educate business client about?
Is that the middle question there? I think one of the most common things we have to educate clients about is evidence. Like, are you looking for just a bit of a demonstration, or do you really want to acquire the type of evidence that you could use to kind of confidently steer your business decisions? Because they'll often have kind of cost and time top of mind, and they're like, well, why can't you just cut this down to kind of 6 people and whip it out in a weekend? And I'm like, well, you could do that, but what are you then basing your decisions on? And giving them a bit of education on what kind of constitutes a reasonable amount of evidence for that particular question is a kind of reoccurring challenge. But that's something we should be able to do, just with a bit of careful discussion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Randy and John.